Janam nityam anantarupam bhaktanukampa vigraham vai Ishavataram parameshamidhyam tam Ramakrishnam Shirsa Namaha. Namaste and welcome to the 11th talk in this series, Mind Management Techniques. Today we will focus on the nature of freedom and immortality of the self. In the last talk on Sunday, we discussed a little bit about the idea of freedom. Therein I narrated to you a little story, because stories are easier to remember. The story about this zoo, where there were these two visitors, two lions that came from out, and they were put into the zoo. The first one was extremely impressed with all the wonderful arrangements in the zoo, all the facilities, which he understood later to be the various systems in the society, the education system, the judiciary system, the security system, recreation, sports, and even provision for people who are elderly. And he was very happy to be in a place like this, away from his jungle. But the second visitor, the moment he stepped into that zoo, he was very much aware of the gates closing behind him. A part of the mind was always reminding him that he was within this enclosure. So even though he was being taken for this wonderful tour, and he was seeing all these very interesting and impressive things organized by the residents of the zoo, when he came across this solitary lion sitting and looking at the wall, not really getting involved in too much in the affairs of the rest of the citizens of the zoo, somehow it resonated with him, and it went to him, and his question was more to, and he could understand that this guy is also looking at the world, and I'm also mindful of the world, and we have some idea about that we are prisoners in this world. And that's when the elderly lion welcomed him, knowing him to be a seeker of freedom. So Swami Vivekananda says nicely, they alone become free who are awake to the idea of freedom. They alone become free who are ever awake to the idea of freedom. Otherwise, we are happy in this prison of this world, busy with certain things, thinking that we are doing something very important and indispensable, and the whole life is spent in this prison of this world. So, that concept of freedom is built into us. Freedom is the song of the soul. It's the very nature of the soul. We cannot forget it forever. We might put it behind, cover it with various engagements, and we're busy with so many things, but now and then again we will come to that, because it's in our spiritual DNA, so to say. Just like every cell has got a DNA and it will build itself according to the constitution of the physical DNA, the swabhava, the very nature of the Atman is, it is free. And it is trying to exert that freedom. Only it's trying to exert that in nature. So we are all seeking for freedom. Education and search for knowledge is freedom from ignorance. Seeking for enjoyments and pleasures, freedom from misery. Constantly trying to ensure that we do not die, and that is an effort that takes 99% of mankind's effort. You think about it, We have all this education system and the various activities so that our existence continues. For example, the whole field of agriculture is there to ensure that we have 3 meals, that we do not die because of hunger or starvation. The whole field of medicine is there so that we do not die because of diseases. The whole field of all this convenience of accommodation, housing, hot in cold weather and cold in cooler in hot weather is there to ensure that the extremes of nature does not kill us. It's all about survival there. But think about how much time is spent there. We are seeking for freedom here, but in this world, and it's related to the freedom of this body as against the changes that are going to happen in nature. We're not seeking the spiritual freedom, yet we are all seekers of freedom. And God, or the Absolute, is freedom. But we sometimes have a very kindergarten concept of God as a person and a being who has created the world and out somewhere there, and it's like a mechanical clock, and he has wound it up and the world is talking along the way. But he has maybe lost control of this world the way it's going, some people might think. So that is a very kindergarten conception of God, an extra cosmic God who has created the world and man and everything, and they have been left to the devices, and he has to be propitiated for various things. And he can be very vengeful, because if you do not propitiate him with worship and your allegiance and devotion, then disease and all other things will visit you. That is a very, very caveman's idea of God. That's not evolved. Sri Ramakrishna says, when man is in ignorance, he thinks that God is some being out there far away. We might meet him in heaven, or when we die, we go to a special place called Vaikuntha, where we are in his presence. When one has developed some spiritual maturity, knowledge, then one understands, at least intellectually in the beginning, that God is my inner controller, the consciousness that is in me, that is moving this puppet of this body and mind. He dwells in the heart of every human being. He's called the Antaryami, inner controller. And that's advanced from the caveman to the modern man. But when full knowledge comes, Vijnana, then one understands that God, or that he's not a person anymore, it's a consciousness, it's an intelligence, he's something, not a physical entity anymore, it's a spiritual entity, and he feels it within himself, like I feel that I'm a conscious being as different from this table. And this knowledge that is in me, that sense of joy and happiness that is in me, that sense of existence that I am all the time throughout the day, from birth to death, from morning to evening, that I factor is there all me. That is a small manifestation of that infinite consciousness that is the divine being. In other words, I am a wave on the ocean of the divine. And when full knowledge comes, Vijnana comes, then he understands that which is in my own heart is in the hearts of every human being, not every human being, everything. Whatever exists because of that absolute existence. Wherever we see some form of consciousness, whether it's in a little bacteria or a plant or an animal or man, it is a manifestation of that consciousness. The difference is in the degree of that manifestation. Somewhere it is more, somewhere it is less. We are all seeking a greater and greater manifestation of that consciousness. Evolution, in spiritual and scientific language, if you want to harmonize, is this dual process. That consciousness is there all the time. It is not changing. Constant consciousness does not evolve. What evolves is the human or the body. So in a bacteria, there is very little rudimentary consciousness. In a worm, you see a little bit more. Then in a higher little insects, and in a monkey, and a dolphin, in a human being. What is changing is the form is becoming purer and purer and purer. And the light, ever-present, constant light is there, that now shines more and more and more. We think we are evolving. In ignorance, we think that consciousness is evolving. No, really matter that constitutes our body-mind complex, that is becoming a better channel to manifest it in our divine light. So that is an ever-present entity inside us. That is our nature. We can't jump out of ourselves. We can't get out of our own self-consciousness. Then it becomes very tricky, if you meet somebody outside and he's looking around everywhere as if he's searching for somebody, and you ask him, so whom are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for myself. You say, that's crazy. What's wrong with you? You are yourself. But you'll find that the story of mankind is just that. We are going out there looking for ourselves. Ourselves as consciousness, ourselves as happiness, ourselves as freedom, ourselves as knowledge, ourselves as immortality. We are that being. Ignorance is when we are not aware of ourselves in our full glory. It's not that we are totally unaware of ourselves. All of us are aware of that consciousness, of the power of that consciousness manifesting in this body. But our attention is not focused on that consciousness. It is focused on the names and forms, the externals that are there. Things, just like in the past I said, if you went into a room and there was only one solitary chair in the middle of that room, and you ask the person, what is there? He says, there's a chair there. And you removed the chair, then you asked him, what is there? He says, there's nothing. He does not say, the room is full of space. So we lose sight of that consciousness which illumines everything. That is the light of consciousness, but we are not aware of that light. Again, like in a dark night, if I take a torchlight and point it up in the sky and ask you, is it lit or is it switched off? And you say, I cannot tell. Can you please point it to a wall? And if I do that, then you will understand how, when the light falls on the wall and bounces back to you, from that you understand that the light torch is giving that light. So likewise, this consciousness is constantly radiating out of us through our 5 sense organs. Ears are hearing, eyes are seeing, and all that. But we are more focused on what is being illumined, not the illuminator. The consciousness is that illuminator. And when that pulls in or covers itself, so holds itself back, like when you go to sleep. Okay, what happened? Everything around you is there, your eyes and instruments are also there, but you're not aware of anything that's happening. Why? For a while, your consciousness has shut itself off and you see everything is dark out there. So this idea of turning your attention from things that are being illuminated to the illuminator is a spiritual discipline. And it's just being aware of that in the first place. There's a process of perception, process of action, everything is, but who is doing that? What is that source? So sometimes we ask that type of question when we see somebody dying. You are in a hospital, somebody is very sick, and maybe that person drifts off into coma, but still alive. The senses are not responding, you're talking, that person can't hear or cannot speak back to you, but you can see the heart is beating, the breath is going, the body temperature is maintained. And then something happens. What happens we do not know, and suddenly all these processes stop. The temperature goes down and everything, and the doctor comes and checks us with his instruments and says, is dead. That means something was there that was maintaining all that. Maybe that person was in that coma state for a long time, but that's gone. And you say, something has left. So, very few stop and pause. Who was that inside that was keeping it all going? And now that consciousness or that being has stepped out, you might say there's a jiva, he has left the body and has gone. That type of idea is there. But yes, that's what happens. So we are so much focused on the manifestation, the action, the play of that consciousness, not on the consciousness itself. Here I am using the word consciousness with respect to the Atman or the self, the real McCoy, as we say, that what we are. So we want to turn that around because we are just keeping ourselves busy with so many things which even if we get them for a while and hold on to them, we'll drift away. Can I get something that will not be taken away from me? Of course, I won't be taken away from myself, but not this physical body. The era comes when I have thought I am the body, and that is ignorance. Body will be taken away from me. Mind, that also will be taken away from me. This individuality, I, that is when you talk about your CV and biodata, that also will disappear. In deep sleep, you don't have any idea of who you are. Yet, it bounces back. So, who am I? That's the sincere search for an answer to that question in terms of not just a intellectual understanding of it by listening to talks or reading some books, becoming a philosopher, so to say, but in terms of realizing ourselves in our full grinder. It's not that we do not know ourselves. Okay, it's not going from 0 to 1. It's going from a lower truth to a higher truth. Progress is about moving from a lower truth to a higher truth. It's not black and white. Swami Vivekananda gives an example and says, suppose somebody had a very powerful rocket and a space shuttle, and it could travel at very high speeds, and he is going towards a particular planet, and every now and then he takes a photo, every an hour. And when he puts all these photos together, all the photos are different. But you cannot say the photo that was closer to the planet and the one he took first, the first one was wrong and the second one is right. No. Both are talking about the same reality, same subject. The one from a distance has less detail. The closer you go, the more clear it becomes. So we are approaching the truth from a lower truth to a higher truth. So when we say I am a body, that is a lower truth, so to say. And that's necessary for dealing with this world. Otherwise, we say, I don't have a body, then you don't take care of yourself, your everyday existence is not possible. Yes, you have to feed it, exercise it, and all those things, but it is a means to an end, not an end in itself. If we make it an end in itself, that's where the problems come. Then, yes, I take care of it and make it a good instrument to have a lot of enjoyments, and then was there any other higher purpose to it? Maybe we do not know. So, those who are awake to the idea of freedom, those lions who want to get out of this zoo, those fish who want to jump out of that net which the fisherman has cast, will make that effort. Others, majority are like, we narrated that little parable out of Sri Ramakrishna's gospel where he said, yes, some of them are so smart that they jump off before the net touches the water. They are the ever free. The second are there, the moment the net falls on them, they struggle, jump here and there, and suddenly they are able to escape. So they become the free one, the mukta. The third category is they are very much aware of the net and they are jumping, but somehow they are not so successful. Yes, maybe in the next life they will try harder and get out. But the fourth category, and the majority are there who bury their nose in the mud and think everything is well, everything is set, as they say. So they're very happy in this world. And they think that's God's grace. So they might come and say, Swamiji, everything is very nice. God is so gracious. He has given me this. He has given me that. I have all those things. No more needs there. No, He has bound you in this. And what's the fate of the fish that is in the net? You end up in the fisherman's cooking pot. That's what happens to us when we die. So God's grace would be when He will try to wake us up from this hypnotism of this world, that this is real, that this is permanent, this happiness and knowledge and life forever is here itself. That would not be God's grace if one continued to think in that way. God's grace would be when He would try to wake us up from this illusion and delusion and say, and so that there is something higher. And so if you think from that perspective, you find that teaching or that attempt to teach us is going on constantly. In so many ways, Mother Nature is trying to tell us that whatever things we are seeking, my child, she says, happiness, knowledge, I can give you a little bit here, a taste of it. But if you are seeking for that infinite happiness, which is your true birthright, which you inherit, that this world cannot provide. Because this world can only cater to finite needs. And I mentioned about Nachiketa, that young boy in the Kathopanishad, who was offered all these things this one can maybe desire in this world. A very long life. Okay, the emperorship of this world, all the types of enjoyments in those days, the chariots and the horses and the elephants and wives and riches and things. On the other hand, this young boy was asking Yamaraj, tell me the nature of death. Some say when somebody dies, he is, others say he is not. He was asking, is there something that is immortal, that does not die when the body dies? And Yamaraj wanted to check out whether this young boy was competent for that knowledge. Did he possess that degree of discrimination and renunciation that is necessary for one to assimilate the spiritual teaching. So to test that out, he tempted him with all those things. And the young boy said, Tavaiva vaha tavanritya jite. You keep your vahanas, these vehicles or transports, chariots, and this dancing and this singing, that's good for you. All these things only weaken the power of the senses, and the body becomes old, and ultimately, even if I live for 10,000 years or so, I will have to come to you only. So you please keep this, teach me the truth about the nature of the Atman. So when somebody has developed that type of discrimination between the unreal and the real, we have this beautiful Vedic mantra, Asato ma Sadgamaya. It's a prayer of a person who is not very happy, who is disenchanted with this world, who has understood that everything in this world is transitory, and yet he is trying to find something permanent in here. So when he comes to that conclusion that whatever he is seeking for cannot be got here, then he prays to some higher power, so the divine being, can you please help me to cross from this entanglement with this world, this identification with this body-mind complex, this attachment to these things of this world, this mind that is constantly running for desiring things here, and let me cross this ocean, this ocean from this one shore of transitory things to the other shore of the Sat. Sat means that which is permanent. So that is the prayer. That it might be articulated in different ways, but if that thought and that feeling and that yearning, if it's not there behind that prayer when we chant that Asato ma Sadgamaya, then it comes out pretty empty and doesn't resonate deep and doesn't reach that source from which that power has to come. So when that really man is being roasted in this world, so to say, and he's helpless and restless and he wants that peace and he can't find it here, that prayer then comes in a very desperate way. Sri Ramakrishna uses the word vyakulta. He's very, very desperate for it. There's a deep yearning for it. He's restless for it. That is a condition necessary to extricate ourselves or our minds out of all these things that keep us busy and attached and tied to this world. Things that we possess, really they possess us, really. So, this body, so in this example or story of this paradise zoo, where these two lions are there, we say there's a world. That's a story form. What is the real world then, which is blocking us and preventing us to get out of this zoo? This body is the zoo. The world is the zoo. So let's examine that a little bit so that we understand that we are really in a prison. And if you understand that, then only the desire for freedom will come. Otherwise, we want to make that prison a beautiful home. But before I tell that, I'm reminded of an incident that happened some years back in one of the centers where I was posted, and that reminded me a little bit of the nature of man in bondage. So this is in currently it's Jharkhand. There's a center, Ramakrishna Mission Vidyapit Deoghar. It's a residential school center. And to provide milk to the students, the center had a dairy farm, and they used to produce quite a bit of milk in the winter months, maybe 600 liters per day. Anyway, they had this cow shed, and for breeding purposes they had a bull, which had its own little enclosure where he is free to roam around. The enclosure was built by these bricks, and they don't reinforce it with concrete, the metal rods and all those things. So there was a very heavy rain one monsoon, and one section of that wall just fell down, and there was a gaping hole. And everyone thought this big bull will just walk out and it will be an issue trying to catch it and bring it back. But to everyone's surprise, the bull never went down. It just stayed there, even though there was no wall. Because it did not have that idea that I am in bondage, that I should step out and be free. So, this is how we are hypnotized that everything is nice, everything is happy, I don't have to make an effort to get out. But Mother Nature will teach us constantly. Every time death will come or suffering will come, which is reminding us whatever you're seeking for is not there. And the soul will become wiser and wiser and wiser. And in time, it will begin to seek for that real freedom, which is its own divine birthright. So, taken in a very physical, material way, this body itself is a bondage wall, because we can't transcend it. We are bound by it, by its needs of providing it all this proper accommodation, food, medicine, and all those type of things. It's like being imprisoned in a cage where there's some 5 holes in that cage, and you can look through one of them, you can hear through another one, but the rest of the whole cage is just solid metal, and we are just somehow happy in that. Sri Ramakrishna says the difference between a bound soul and a free soul, and he gave that example, is the bound soul is kept in a box, like I explained, with some little holes, and you can peep and see get a little glimpse of things out there, while a free soul is like even though he's embodied, he's like in a glass cage. He looks around and everything is visible in all directions. Now, what's the difference? How did that steel become glass? How did that become transformed? And that limitation sort of fell away. That is the real purpose of spiritual discipline, so to say. Purification of this mind. This bondage is in the mind, and this freedom is also in the mind or through the mind. But this mind, not this mind has to be transformed. So, that's the real task of uplifting the mind from its gross perceptions, where we are aware of the physical world, making it subtler, making it finer. And as the fineness, the degree of subtlety increases, things around will automatically change. Ultimately, it becomes so fine that it's just become transparent, and everything is experienced in soul full totality. So, that is how this attempt has to be made. There has to be a transformation. Otherwise, we would be knowing things about spiritual varieties, subjects. We can talk about the Atman and Brahman, and talk about consciousness, which is a big topic, among the scientists. Apparently, they are asking, talking of consciousness as an objective thing. Consciousness is our subjective nature. I am that consciousness. I cannot make consciousness as an external thing like a book and say this is something we can put under a microscope and study it in an objective way. So there are some limitations in the scientific process, so to say. And if we stick to that, we will never be able to understand or study this subject of consciousness. Subject in the sense it's a subjective nature. Cannot be objectified. So, in between is this mind. The difference between an ignorant person, ignorant means who is not fully aware of his spiritual nature, and one who is enlightened, who is fully aware of his spiritual nature, like a Buddha. Buddha is one who is totally aware of himself as Bodha, as consciousness. Somebody like Christ is somebody who has understood that his I sense is one with the cosmic I sense. I and my Father are one. Sufi saints, when he says, Anal Haq, I am he has merged himself in that cosmic consciousness, just like a wave merges itself into the ocean. So no more little I there. It has become one with that I. Really, it was always the ocean. For some reason, it had projected itself as a little wave and got stuck in that idea that I am the wave. And for many, they've forgotten that there's an ocean. They even deny the existence of an ocean there. They think I'm a random wave floating around there on my own existence. Such is the understanding of many people about who they are. So, this process of returning, reconnecting to the self or the Atman or Paramatman is what spirituality is all about. It's in that process, study of scriptures, which are recordings of those who have experienced that consciousness, discussions trying to have more and more clarity, is the intellectual mental part of it. And we can study that in great detail. Some people might feel that they must study the map and know every bend and every corner of the road before they travel from one city to the other. Others will say, I've got a rough idea, let's get onto the road, we'll keep on following the map. If we get lost, we will ask somebody the way, but I just want to reach the destination. I don't have all the time to know everything in detail. So the sincere seekers don't mess around. They just get something there of idea and they're on the road. Sri Ramakrishna also says, if a person wanted to go to Puri, Jagannath Puri is the Lord's place for pilgrimage, from Calcutta, maybe he doesn't know which direction is. So he says, doesn't matter, I'll go. And on the way he's asking various people, tell me, which way is Puri? And everyone says, just go down this road. And if he keeps on walking, he will reach the destination. Others are there who would like to have everything planned, and so much time goes in that planning that they don't walk the talk, so to say, in this life. So, sadhana, spiritual discipline, sincerely done, we'll feel that we are moving on the journey. Just like in a winter night, if there's a fire in a corner of a room, if you sit too far away, you will not feel the heat of it. You have to come closer and closer, and then you will feel the warmth of it. Likewise, the truth that we are trying to approach, no one needs to tell us that we are approaching and getting closer to it. You will feel it just like the warmth of the fire as we come closer and closer and closer. The important thing is to start moving. Wherever we are, at least we are far better off those lower life forms, and we have struggled through that journey. Now, the glory of a human being is that he has that special capacity to make that final jump and overcome all the limitations of this human body, drop this totally and just be one with his true nature. That is possible in a human body. That's why this is a special birth. A human birth is a special birth. So what has to be done? This mind that we have has to be purified. Chitta Shuddhi. That's a technical term in the scriptures they use. Purification of the mind. Through which, so what happens when you go through that process and you say you've got to purified, what happens there? Through that instrument, one is able to experience or apprehend the consciousness nature of what we are. So in the Upanishad, the sages say, Drishyate means you can see. Here means you can experience. Drishyatu agraya buddhaya. So a special faculty develops in a person who practices meditation and concentration regularly. A buddhi, an intellect, which is very sharp, agra means very sharp, pointed, that can cut through the veil of ignorance, so to say. It's like a laser which is simply light, but when you can make it into a coherent beam, it can cut through steel and concrete and all that. Otherwise it was just light. But some tweaking and some adjustment had to be done to it, that it became a very powerful force to cut through metal and all that. So the mind also is a tool, an energy, so to say. But it is sort of not resonating and is not maximizing its own energy. It dissipates and cancels its own energy in so many ways. If you use the ideas from physics, for example, energy travels in a form of a wave. Okay. And there are many thoughts and ideas in the mind, constantly that energy is going out. Now, if these waves are totally out of rhythm, out of phase, and you add them up, they might all cancel out. If they are in phase, they will add to each other, and we say this is constant constructive interference, and you see these beautiful high peak points in that. But if they're totally out of phase, they will neutralize each other. So if we say all our thoughts are there, but they are all not synchronized. Some are going this way, they're out of phase. Okay. And the net result is a very weak mind. But if we could learn how to make this energy that we are radiating, the mental energy, in rhythm, to resonate all the waves together, then that's what a laser beam is. Laser beam is light that is coherent in phase. And It might be coming out from a small little battery power, but you get a beam that can go 100 meters. A red spotlight that's a laser beam. Same energy, but something else had to be done. That is one way of trying to use a little bit of science to explain how our thoughts, if we can train ourselves them or entrain them. Okay, entrain them means they all form in a line, just like the railway bogies. They one behind the other, they all go in rhythm. Or it's just like in a military platoon, the soldiers march together. Like that. That type of rhythm. If our thoughts align themselves, then that becomes a powerful force. So wherever we can channelize something in a particular direction, in one direction in rhythm, using whatever, that becomes a current. For example, in a piece of metal, let's use a little bit of science. Okay, a piece of metal has got a sea of electrons that are free to float around. You apply a potential difference, a plus and a minus in a battery. And before you know this, what happens? These electrons that were freely floating are beginning to flow in one direction. So these charges, when they begin to flow, you call that as an electric current. And in between, if you break that and put an electric bulb inside there, now the charge begins to flow through that filament. And as it flows through that, it hits it and that begins to glow. The electric current, electrical energy becomes converted to light energy, heat energy there. So but it was there all the time. The charges had the potential to go, but they were moving in all random directions, so nothing was happening. It's when we apply a potential difference, that is when the flow begins to happen. This idea of flow we see in nature everywhere. If you think about it, heat flows from a higher temperature to a lower temperature. Water flows from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. Ocean currents flow from one end of the ocean to the other because of a temperature gradient. And if it's the air currents rise in the sky because of the difference in temperature, and it can build up, it can become a tornado also. Then we'll see in the society, money flows from a rich man to a poor man. And you might say, knowledge flows from a teacher to a student. That's how people would like to see. But really, the teacher does not give knowledge. The knowledge is always in the person. It's the nature of the soul. What the teacher's job is to remove the barriers, the obstructions, and the light shines through. Anyway, there's a flow. And it is necessary to have a little bit of difference. Otherwise, if the student is, suppose you have a tutor or some high school teacher, and you're going to the teacher, working, studying, and in that process of education, your knowledge level goes up and it reaches to the same level as the teacher, then you say, let me get a university professor. I have learned all that I could learn from that person. So the moment we reach the same balance, if there's no potential difference, if the voltage at both ends are same, there's no more flow. So, if you want this mind to flow from this lower level to a higher level, then it must be connected to a potential difference. Okay. But if it's at the same level all the time, there's no polarity, then there's no flow, we are happy in that same area. So this awakening to the idea of freedom, that real freedom belongs at a consciousness level, not at the physical level. That creates a polarity for seeking freedom. And then the efforts of the mind and whatever we do is now not trying to find a beautiful, happy place here, but to channelize that energy, just like the electrons are now beginning to flow to a particular direction, and that has that elevation effect. But if we do not have that understanding, that or experience or desire to make that change, asatoma sadgamaya, I'm happy in asat only, in darkness, in this life is good, then that effort doesn't come to translate or make a change in ourselves. How do we awaken ourselves to that? So, they alone become free who are awake to the idea of freedom. And those who are not, they're very happy with this world. Everything is good and they thank God for giving him all those type of things. How do we stimulate this idea of freedom in ourselves? So various ways are there. You might see a free soul, and in that person you see the wonderful expression of all those qualities. Look, this person is totally detached, he's full of happiness, at peace, and all those things. It's a wonderful manifestation of so many divine qualities in there. Love and compassion and kindness, and there's so much clarity of the mind. It looks like there are no cobwebs in his brain, and there's nothing where he can point his mind and nature just reveals itself to him. That's a wonderful mind. So he says, I would like to be like that. Some resonation happens in there, and he drifts to that person or towards him, says, so tell me the way, how do you get there, or whatever he has said and written there, let me study that, and maybe I too can become like that. So that can trigger it, but the wood has to be a little dry, so to say. Otherwise, you put a spark, only some smoke will come out. So that means we would have to walk away with some of these desires for enjoyment in this world. So long the mind is still infatuated with this world and thinking that I would like to have these sense pleasures and all those type of things, no matter how much you give these spiritual instructions, it will not have an effect on them. It is just not ready. Like a green piece of timber, branch you have cut and you put in a fire, you just get a lot of smoke out of it. But if it has been dried, when it's been roasted in this world, so to say, and the sap has evaporated, now you put that into in fire and immediately it catches fire. So you'll find that when the spiritual instruction is given out to people, for many it just goes over their head and it's also nice, and some are very happy with some rituals and ceremonies and all those things. Why? Because they serve his needs in this world. He's not praying for freedom, he's not praying for knowledge, he's not praying for devotion, he's praying for these things in this world only. The world is the goal and God is the means to most people, so to say. So when they cannot achieve those things that they want, whether I want to have a job, I want to have children, I want to have a promotion, and all those things. So if they feel that they cannot do that through their own individual effort, then they will go and pray for those things and ask for those things. And if they little bit of bribery is there, so to say, when he gets it, then he makes the offering and all those type of things, and that's the need of his God. But if he doesn't need these things, then he also doesn't need God. Okay, so to say, that's a beginner, so to say. At least he knows there's a being who can fulfill his desires and prayers, so to say. But when he wants to go beyond this, seek for something higher, then his prayers change. Then he comes and says, really, I don't want these things of this world. Some basic food, clothing and shelter is that all I need. And at the end of the day, I'm sure I don't go beyond 100. After 80, if I maintain some good healthy life, that itself is good. But, death is going to come. Everything will be taken away. What is that I can take from here, out of this life, as my own? And it's not. What goes with us? The scriptures say, our karma, yatha karma, yatha shrutam. For every action, there is a reaction. As we sow, so we shall reap. So in the next life, we will experience the consequences and the results of our action. That goes with us. And knowledge. Knowledge means what is the wisdom we have extracted from our experiences in this world. Wisdom which will be something that will trigger your thought processes. Suddenly somebody takes to a spiritual life. That means in many, many lifetimes he has had many, many experiences through which he has understood the real nature of this world, and now in this time he wants to make a break, so to say. It doesn't just happen like that, but all that culminated into wisdom. Sarva karma akhilam partha jnane parisamapyate. All actions means all experiences in the totality should culminate in knowledge, in wisdom. And if that does not happen, then we have to repeatedly, again and again, go through that experiences, sometimes painful ones, because we are not learning from those things. So sooner or later, the soul, whose DNA component is freedom, so to say, that begins to wake up. And when it cannot find that freedom here, then it looks around and it finds a free soul or somebody who talks about, and that person gravitates towards that. There's a natural interest. He works hard to have some acquaintance with that knowledge, And if it reverberates and resonates with his inner call, then you'll see there becomes a little flow of that current. That effort begins to be directed not towards enjoyment, but towards freedom. But that polarity should happen. That means some knowledge of the Atman, its ever-free nature, its omniscient nature, its omnipotent, its innate purity, beauty, goodness, strength, fearlessness, and all these wonderful divine qualities that we can think of. When that begins to become attractive to the mind, then this mind is not so much interested in the things of the world, it becomes little focused. It begins to resonate with that ideal. That means that ideal now begins to become alive. And when that idea becomes alive, any idea for that matter, when it becomes alive for us, it draws all our energy and action and thought and everything into it. Taken in a very literal way, for example, somebody is a doctor. If you ask him, how did you become a doctor? When did you really start thinking that you wanted to be a doctor? And can you just trace your thought process? So you might say, there was somebody in my family who was a doctor, and I saw the wonderful things he is doing like that in treating patients, and I found that initially all doctors say, we want to become doctors because we feel so much for the misery of the world and that we would like to do something. Those wonderful sentiments are there. So as the child grows through this primary school and all that, he's learning more and more, and that ideal is becoming a little brighter and brighter. At some point, by the time he comes to the end of high school, he has sort of decided that idea has become very alive. At that time, he doesn't think, I want to become an engineer or astronaut or fighter pilot or something like that. And that idea becomes so much alive that he is now preparing for that medical examinations. He's putting so much time and effort into it. He's not giving so much time for his other distractions, so to say, making sure that he gets those grades and gets admission into that particular university or that course. And there also for 6-7 years, he studies so hard, sacrificing so much. The whole mind is now pointed to that one ideal and locked onto it, and not letting go. And the body and the mind, all its energies are directed through that one singular purpose. And what happens? That ordinary mind, that sort of unprogrammed hard disk that we are born with, we keep on programming it, putting a lot of information and knowledge in there until our whole mind is full about how a human body works, what is constituted, what are thoughts and processes, what is its health state, what's its disease state, and then with that he is able to now treat, come out, we graduate into a doctor, we start practicing it. But we see, somewhere that ideal would have become so strong that other ideas simply fade away into insignificance. And that one singular idea captures his whole imagination, and physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, the whole energy is poured onto that. And that idea then grows and transforms that person into that doctor. He could have picked up any other profession. And if he went through that process, he might have become a scientist or accountant, whatever. So such is the power of a living idea. That's what I'm trying to get across. And if we can make the Atman a living ideal for us, then just like an idea of simply becoming a doctor transforms a young high school student into a medical professional, likewise, that a living ideal of freedom or the nature of the Atman has the same liberating, even more powerful, that it will make out of man into a God. And that is what spiritual life is all about. Man is a combination of three things: animality, humanity, and divinity. All these possibilities are there. And you will find in society, some people are at the lower level. By animality, no disrespect to them. All it means that they are sense-bound, instinctive. The animal level is a very instinctive level. You're hungry, you eat, you're thirsty, you drink, and everything happens without much of reasoning and thinking process there. And they're busy with food, eating, drinking, procreating, and all that. That is what we call an animal existence. Man is different from that because we have got a higher brain power. And in that power we have this capacity of understanding, reasoning. Understanding means collecting information, but not only collecting it, we are able to process that, connect, get knowledge out of it, seeing what are the interconnections, and that knowledge helps us manipulate nature. But more than that, there is a capacity of wisdom out of that knowledge. That is a special capacity, those who can churn and refine that a little bit more. Out of milk you can take out that clarified butter, the cream. So when that wisdom comes, that's the essence. Not everyone is trained to do that. To do that, to extract that fine essence out of our experiences with this world, we require a fine instrument. So that instrument is this agraya buddhi, that fine intellect in a spiritual aspirant who meditates regularly. That capacity develops, a power of finer penetration. He sees more than other people. He is able to understand the essence of things much faster than other people. Others see the information, they get some knowledge and see some patterns, but what is the energy, what's the play of ideas and co-principles, they are not able to put their finger on. Where that fine mind is there, it can catch hold of those things. So such people who develop this, and through training it's developed, through systematic training it's developed, it doesn't happen just like that. So when they practice the spiritual disciplines, this mind becomes purer, becomes finer, becomes subtler. And to the subtle mind, its own inherent powers begin to manifest. It was there all the time, but it was covered. Just like a knife, if it is dull, edge is dull, you try to cut, it will not cut through. But if I make it sharp, then it can cut through something very easily. So how do we make that mind, that knife sharp? Likewise, how do we make that mind sharp? How do we develop this subtle capacity? And what is this? Sukshma darshi. Darshi means to see. Sukshma means subtle. So a person who practices spiritual discipline, as he evolves in that path, he develops this capacity of apprehending subtler truths. So have said the seers of subtle things, Sukshma darshi. So the Upanishad says, this mind itself has to be trained and made pure, more concentrated. So all this negative, dissipative energies that is flowing out, that has to be checked in first thing. Okay, because that's precious energy, that's good. Now whatever is harnessed is to be transformed into a higher level. You see, there's a solid piece of ice, I can't do very much with it. But if I heat it, it becomes water. It flows. If I heat it higher, to a higher temperature, it becomes steam. And the energy in a steam is far higher than in a block of ice. This, turbines run because of that high powered pressure of the steam. So, likewise, in the subtler level, the energy level is higher. In the subtler component, we understand very simply the temperature of ice is 0. You heat it, on a stove. What we are doing is we are providing more energy, and the water molecules are beginning to vibrate faster and faster, and suddenly they break off and they begin to flow around now. So they have a greater degree of freedom. They're moving around there. And then we heat that again over the stove, and some of them, bubbles are coming, means some of them are just becoming water vapor, and they just jump out of the pot, and suddenly they filled up the whole room and everywhere. Greater degree of freedom when energy is injected to it. It's all over the place. But ice I could hold, what I have to somehow catch it in my cup of my hand, but water vapor I can't. It has become free. It cannot be caught by physical matter anymore. Likewise, this mind, when it is very gross, it is like that ice. You inject energy into it, transform it, it becomes more subtle. Take it another, it becomes even causal. And as it transforms itself to these higher levels, higher states, its capacity to interact and the energy and the power in it goes higher and higher and higher. That mind becomes a better instrument to grasp the subtle truths. Rishis are, in English, what would be the technical term? Mantra drastas, seers of subtle truths. Mantras are not words that we hear through our ears or it's written in the book or something. They are very high spiritual energies that become little grossified, just like water vapor became water and became ice. So by the time I'm speaking and you are hearing, it is almost like at the ice block level. It has become very, very gross. But there is some energy inside that has become solidified. So at one end, we have the spiritual nature, which is the Atman. It cools down, so to say. Water vapor cools down and becomes ice, it becomes solid. So there is some entity, but there's a gradation. As it becomes projected or manifested, it becomes out of that consciousness, it becomes the mind, and that becomes matter. Matter and mind are two names of the same thing. When it is vibrating at a lower level, we call it matter. When it's vibrating at a high level, we call the mind. The substance is one in two different states. And so, in the Vedantic cosmology, everything that is matter is called Akasha. All forms of energy is called prana. This world is a interplay of Akasha and prana, and the science by which we control this is our physical sciences, and that's what we are taught in our universities, and that's we are working. But there's a higher science by which this mind and matter is managed by controlling the energy flow in our own body and the flow of that energy through our thought process, and that is generalized. So this Akasha and Prana merge in something what is called the cosmic mind, and that mind also merges into its own cause, and that ultimate cause out of which it comes, that is the pure consciousness, and that's what we are. So there's a whole spectrum of realities, and we are looking through that one slit, which is called the physical world. Sages who have lifted the mind to a higher level, they see the same thing and they say this is heaven, or these various lokas are there, and ultimately when the mind goes to the highest level, then everything is pure consciousness. When the same mind comes down, the world comes in dancing. When it goes up, it disappears. And if you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you'll get a hint of when he explains what are the experiences we are having. So, in this darkness of this physical world, looking through a single slit, we are born here, we live here, we die here. This is the prison, this is the walls, these are the walls of the zoo that we need to break. And the tools are within us, our own mind. So, we talked about this series of talks are there, is growing like Hanumanji's tail, is one after the other. Anyway, the subject matter was mind, but mind itself is a product of consciousness, and mind itself is a tool, instrument by which that if it can be through proper training, can be re-engineered, recast, transformed, metamorphosed, so to say, then it can become spiritualized. So, in essence, consciousness has materialized into this world, matter has to be spiritualized into consciousness, and that's the whole essence and gist of what spiritual life is all about. So, this mind that you have, you've been talking and listening to some of these talks on meditation, and the method is, yes, understand the concepts, but practice. Do your meditations with great intensity and regularity. Repetition of the mantra is very, very powerful. We'll take that topic up again at another time, and be up and doing. As the mind will become purer, all these ideas will become clearer to us. Otherwise, like a dull knife, we can't cut something subtle. So we have to transform and make this instrument better, and then nature will reveal itself to us. We don't have to worry about asking it to reveal itself. The moment you zoom your microscope to 100 power magnification, that substance will reveal itself. You don't have to tell me, I've got 100 power magnification, can you please show it yourself to me? No. You change your power of magnification to 1000, it will reveal itself accordingly. What we have to do is keep on changing the power of magnification. Here, that power of magnification is the capacity of the mind to perceive subtle truths. As we make that change, the reality will change to us. This which we call world becomes transformed into God. So, keep up the meditation, and we will go a little deeper about how we bring about that transformation, that change in our mind, so that we can have that spiritual experience here and now, because the reality is here and now also. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.